Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June. What is it? June. Yeah, June 7th. I got to get a little closer to the computer here so I can see the difference between J-U-N and J-U-L. Doesn't feel any different from July. It's pretty hot out here, but I imagine, I don't know. I'm trying to remember from former years. Will the cicadas be gone by July? It's awfully loud out here. But, hey, we welcome our new cicada overlords, I guess, is what's happening here. You can't go outside without accidentally breathing one in. They're very tasty and crunchy, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Good quality protein, and as far as I know, no 5G microchip or anything like that, so I think we're all in the clear there. Plenty to catch up on over the weekend. The former guy was out and about again giving speeches, but very weakly delivered, disgusting, horrible thing, blah, blah, blah. I opted against a big rally speech and instead went with a small, controlled crowd, GOP convention, I guess state convention in North Carolina. And to give you an idea of how impactful his speech was, the big buzz on Twitter was he wearing his pants backwards? That was actually an issue under debate yesterday. I can't tell you what it looks like in the picture. The picture looks like garbage to me. I have no idea. People were, I don't know, videoing the speech off of their TVs, and you can't see anything. And all the fact-checking type people are like, no, his pants weren't backwards, although I don't know how you check that. I don't know, maybe if you have a better picture than I do. But at any rate, that was actually the big talk. What really matters is that the former president, and he's not that long out of office, gave a speech somewhere which was full of his usual red meat, which used to get live television coverage all the time. C-SPAN actually did cover this thing live, apparently, but C-SPAN is C-SPAN. I mean, I like C-SPAN, but let's be honest. It's not like people are wandering by C-SPAN and saying, yes, great, I'll just watch this. This is entertaining. And the fact that the content of his speech didn't get any more attention than the actual question of whether his pants were backwards is pretty telling. At the very least, his pants were very wrinkly. We can have that. I think we've settled on that. And I don't know whether that drove what people thought they saw. It doesn't. I don't know what to tell you. If you saw the discussion about it online, you were no doubt entertained by it. If you didn't see it, you're probably glad you didn't. If you don't know anything about it, you probably think only in America and only if Donald Trump is involved could anybody really be debating whether or not his pants were backwards. Yes, Greg points out that nobody could see the zipper of his pants, but thank God, no one wants to see the zipper of Donald Trump's pants. That's like the last thing you see in life. You know, the old joke about the last thing that goes through a bug's mind as it hits your windshield, right? If you're getting a good look at the zipper on Donald Trump's pants, your life is over. Forget it. At the minimum, you'll kill yourself. It's not a place you want to be. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. Is all I can tell you. He looked terrible. He sounded terrible. People pointing out the sound quality of his voice is changing a little bit too, very gravelly. No doubt not taking as good care of himself as people were taking care of him when he was in the presidency. Or just, he's an older guy. Whatever. Anyway, naturally the speech was full of garbage. It was him reminiscing. You remember that time I totally stole that election? Or you remember that time when Democrats did a thing that got me angry? You remember that time when I broke a law? So nothing special there. The crowd, mildly enthusiastic, not all that large. Basically on hand to boo the names of people who have set themselves up as anti-Trump or have refused him some favor or another in the past, like in rigging the election in Georgia or something like that, and then cheering for him. I believe also over the weekend, somewhere along the line, I read that Lara Trump was putting to rest the stupid idea that she was going to run for Senate in North Carolina. This after the exact same thing happened when people said Ivanka Trump would run for Senate in Florida. But speaking of weird things to run for over the weekend, and things that don't make any goddamn sense whatsoever, but that involve Donald Trump, just because, for old time's sake, we'll talk about him for a few minutes at the top of the show. I believe he went on Steve Bannon's radio-ish show over the weekend. You know, like we have a radio-ish show. He does the same. He might even be on the radio somewhere, for all I know. Anyway, he went on his show, by which I mean he probably phoned in. I don't know if he did it live. And someone floated the idea that he should run for Congress in one of the seats in Florida. And of course, you know, he being so super popular in Florida and everywhere in the world, he would totally win, and he probably could win such a seat. And Bannon's idea was that he would then stand for Speaker of the House when he swept a huge majority of Republicans into the House along with him. And then, as Speaker of the House, he could then impeach Joe Biden, which intrigued him greatly, which also tells us, you know, in 4 years as being president of the United States, still hasn't learned, for one thing, that you don't need to be elected to the House in order to be elected Speaker of the House. Not to mention that, no, it's not an arbitrary decision of the Speaker of the House to impeach the president, although, yes, they do set the agenda and will have a great deal of influence over whether or not their members will go there. But these guys don't need any pushing to that. So it's not like you have to do it as Speaker of the House, and it's not like you have to go through the trouble of running for Congress. It's actually a big embarrassment probably for someone like you to run for a little House seat in Florida. But whatever. If it takes up your time, fantastic. Go ahead and do it. So I don't know. I'm not certain why he still hasn't figured that out, or why Steve Bannon hasn't figured that out. But it is a good point, and I did see somebody saying over the weekend, you know, with respect to Kevin McCarthy and his willingness to sell out everything, his soul, his political career, the country, what have you, in service to Donald Trump, that it would be somehow fitting for him to have sold all of that out on the premise that he would support the guy who would lead the Republicans to victory, and then he would become Speaker of the House, only to have that guy swoop in and steal the Speaker's gavel from him. It would be a perfect end to the McCarthy career, except that then we would have Donald Trump as involved in public life, although who knows. Maybe he wouldn't be able to climb the stairs to get to the Speaker's rostrum. That's a possibility I hadn't considered. Greg Dworkin is here, having considered all possibilities, 23 of those possibilities listed in my Skype notes to begin with. So good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning.
Okay, good. That's one of the things taken care of. 22 to go. I don't know. Good weekend? Pants on straight?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Reasonably good. It's been pretty hot here.
Yeah, it's
we're in the middle of a heat wave, and so people are taking a few precautions. It's interesting because the local headlines here have pretty much been dominated by COVID for months and months and months.
Well,
but,
yes.
you know, there's always three phases to a disaster, catastrophe, whatever.
Probably.
A debacle. Yeah, you know, there's the prepping for it, and then there's the dealing with it when it's here, and then there's the recovery period. So we're quickly moving into the recovery period, as is the rest of the United States. And for a couple of days this week, for the first time in recent memory, every local headline wasn't about COVID, although today's are.
No. We had a local one. Well, it didn't make the headlines, but one of the doctors I speak to about stuff told me the first time that's been nobody in the hospital with COVID around here since the beginning. Oh, great.
Right. We had one of those as well. And, you know, people are now dealing with, okay, what does it mean for the schools? What does it mean for local grocery stores and so on and so forth?
They're opening.
And, you know, it was interesting that I had a tweet from Scott Gottlieb over the weekend. I think I put it on Saturday's Pundit Roundup. I don't even remember anymore because I'm too old to remember what I did on Saturday.
Right.
And something along the lines of, look, you know, I wear masks when I go into stores, not so much because I'm worried about it. I'm vaccinated, and so I'm not going to get sick. But it's courtesy. It's etiquette. And I'm just trying to convey to people that I understand that you may be in a different situation than me, and so what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And I thought it was pretty nice.
I think that is nice. I feel the same way. And I start to wonder whether other people who are in the same situation with me just want people wearing masks anyway, because let's all wear masks so that people who have to wear masks feel comfortable wearing them or whatever. Or just, hey, I like having one of these on my face for a little while. That's all.
Right. But people are reacting a different way. For example, there's a piece in The Hill today. The Mississippi governor, Tate Reeves, but the Biden goal is 70% of U.S. vaccinated by July 4th is arbitrary.
Yeah.
Well, all goals are arbitrary.
Right. Yeah, I saw you say that.
Because it's an arbitrary,
That's
deadline.
what I would like to do.
So you could get somewhere. I'm, going to clean up my room by the end of the weekend.
I'm going to run for
lose
governor of
weight
Mississippi.
in a month. These are all arbitrary goals.
Right. Why is he the governor of Mississippi? Why did he decide to run? It was his goal to run and become governor. Now, of course, by dint of the election law, he is. But, I mean, the decision, that was arbitrary.
So
Nobody needed that.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Israeli politics.
Oh.
And then circle it back to what's going on in the United States. And I was intrigued by this terrible piece in the New York Times by Tom Friedman, which was preceded by him on the talk shows, talking about the fact that somehow or other Netanyahu is Trump and the election results with a new government is Biden. And it's, of course, nonsense, at least half nonsense. The part about Netanyahu being Trumpy is not totally far-fetched.
Okay. Yeah,
the part about the reaction being Biden is. But
that's
I want to start with talking about somebody you probably haven't thought of in a long time, if you ever did.
Almost sure.
I'm old enough to remember him. His name is Meir Kahane.
I haven't thought of him in a while. That's true.
And when I was growing up, he was very active in New York City. He actually preceded Curtis Sliwa, current activist. Curtis Sliwa started the Guardian Angels,
right,
which was a unarmed group of people who would ride the subways to keep you safe, and he's trying to parlay that into a political career. He's run, I think, before for mayor, but he's certainly parlayed it into a radio talk show host. He's running now as a Republican to replace Bill de Blasio. But before that, a decade before that or so, Meir Kahane lived in New York and started something called the Jewish Defense League, which was a group of people who would react violently to perceived anti-Semitism. And it was not a good thing, and he was a rather controversial figure, to say the least. His Wikipedia entry notes in 1968, Kahane was one of the co-founders of the Jewish Defense League. In 1971, he co-founded Koch, a new political party in Israel. And the same year, he was convicted in New York for conspiracy to manufacture explosives and received a suspended sentence of 5 years. In 1984, he became a member of the Knesset, the Jewish parliament, when Koch gains its only ever seat in parliamentary elections. And the part that I found interesting, and I thought immediately of Empty Green, Kahane was boycotted across the aisles of the Knesset and would often speak in front of an empty chamber. The Israel Broadcasting Authority avoided coverage of his activities. And so he became a pariah, and nobody would speak to him. His positions in the government there were incredibly racist. Basically wanted to want everybody in the United States immediately to mass migrate to Israel and then get rid of the Arabs.
I don't.
He wanted to forbid sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews. He wanted to separate Jewish and Arab neighborhoods, and he wanted to end any cultural meetings whatsoever between Jewish and Arab students. So he was advocating for an apartheid state. He was eventually assassinated. But his party, although it doesn't exist anymore, it was kind of absorbed into some of the other far-right parties. And there was one in particular which was described by the Associated Press in a piece in March before the last election. An alliance of far-right groups, including openly racist and homophobic candidates, appears poised to enter Israel's parliament, possibly as an indispensable member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition, according to exit polls. The religious Zionist Party includes a new incarnation of the Kahanist movement, a Jewish extremist group outlawed as terrorists by Israel, the United States, and other Western
Wow.
countries decades ago
Serious?
over its incitement to violence against Arabs.
Well, that's really
Now,
something.
the religious Zionist Party won some seats. And then, of course, there was another election. And as of this morning, the thing that sparked this whole riff here is Noga Tarnopolsky reports Knesset Speaker Yair Levin will formally announce that Yair Lapid has succeeded in forming a government at 4 p.m. about now, with the opening of the new session of Knesset.
Okay. Well, we'll check my watch. Oh, I don't have a watch. But you're probably right.
There you go. It's something like that.
Yeah.
All right. So this particular religious Zionist party has been relatively active recently. They are one of the sponsors of a monthly parade, a Israeli flag parade, where people take the Israeli flag and march through the Muslim section of Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. So it started out
in a deliberate provocation, and they do it every month at the beginning of every month.
Oh, well, at least they know when it's coming.
Yes. And so what happened last month is
it was coming.
You know, it happened to be one of the penultimate provocations that led to the recent fighting between Hamas and Israel in terms of the violence there. So this particular piece from Haaretz, flag march has all the elements to bring Jerusalem tensions back to the boiling point. There have been troubling responses that raise concerns that the impending march will be a repeat of the previous one, including ensuing tragic chain of events. A few people know this, says this report from Haaretz, but the flag march in Jerusalem is actually a monthly event. On the first day of every Hebrew calendar month, small groups of religious Jews carrying flags come to the Old City to an event comprised of visiting the gates. They're not the gates of the Old City, but the ones leading to the Temple Mount. And you walk through the Old City's Muslim quarter and hold prayer sessions in small plazas outside the gates, which are, and here's a little understatement here, among the most volatile and sensitive spots in the entire Middle East.
Okay.
And each month it's a tense event guarded by dozens of police officers, and this coming Thursday heralds the new month, but gate hopping this time will be much more dangerous. And so what happened is that with the election of the new government, which hasn't formally occurred yet, but it is starting to happen, organizers canceled the Jerusalem March after police refused to let it pass through the Muslim quarter. And then the article about it in Haaretz says the Kahanist lawmaker plans anyway to march through the Old City's Damascus Gate, a flashpoint of tensions, but he's likely to do so on his own because he couldn't get a permit. So that's why I started with Meir Kahane, because I want to remind people of who he was and what it means when they say he's a Kahanist lawmaker. So we're talking about virulent, racist, homophobic, apartheid-style politics here.
Yeah.
And that won't be permitted to happen, so things are going to diffuse a little bit. And part of the reason I tell this whole story is that there's been a lot of press about, with Netanyahu losing, the last card he has to play is whether or not he's going to try to gin up a January 6th type of insurrection.
Yes. Sure.
And so this flag march might well have been part of it, and that's why I'm telling this whole story here.
Okay.
And so, it's of interest because when right-wing demagogues lose, they don't always go quietly. We're seeing that in this country. We're seeing it in Israel. And so, the Trumpy part of the Netanyahu-Biden parallel might be true. The Biden parallel isn't, because there's nothing really comparable there.
Yeah, that's true. I have a piece to that puzzle, but I'm going to let you go on here, so not to interrupt.
Well, that's about it, and I was reading this, and then at the same time I was reading this piece in the New York Times to bring it a little bit closer to home about Arizona and the debacle there in terms of the so-called recount.
Okay.
In Arizona 2020 election review, risk for Republicans and democracy, experts call it a circus. Polls say it'll hurt the GOP in 2022, the part I don't think we emphasize enough.
Hope so.
But Republicans are on board and elsewhere despite warnings of lasting damage to the political system. So did you have a piece that fit in that puzzle?
Yeah, right in between that last part was the tweet of Aryeh Kovler, who I happened to notice tweeting Netanyahu's latest comments that might sound oddly familiar since you were pointing out the Trumpiness and the parallels and whatever Tom Friedman was trying to pull off. I don't know when he said it, but the quote was, "We are witnessing the biggest election fraud in the history of the country." He also called his son's doxing suspension from Facebook and Twitter the greatest fraud in the history of democracy. And just to clear things up, Aryeh points out, when Netanyahu says election fraud, he's referring to right-wing parties supporting the opposition coalition, thus stealing right-wing votes. And that's a political argument, not a claim that the vote was tampered with, but surely designed, as he says, to rhyme with Trump. He's definitely making use of the same rhetoric, and I don't know, cross that with your march.
Well, there's a piece in the Times of Israel this morning echoing Trump. Netanyahu says election stolen, the deep state within the new coalition.
There's not
An
that
interview
much
with right-wing TV outlet using language reminiscent of former U.S. President. Prime Minister also claims Bennett is a habitual liar who's holding a fire sale.
Oh, well, that's nice, too.
And the potential incoming government was in league with the so-called deep state. And then sometime over the weekend, he made some comments about if I go down, it's going to take the entire world right wing with me, and that's somehow bad.
Yeah, right. I just signed up.
That's actually a plus, not a minus, but that's
I just donated all my money. That's that. We are closed. I'm out of dollars.
Speaking to the station, as Bennett held Naftali Bennett, the incoming prime minister, held a press conference in which he urged the prime minister to let go and not leave scorched earth behind him. Netanyahu's rhetoric appeared to inch closer to that of former U.S. President Donald Trump as he charged that the incoming government was dangerous. So it's of interest, and I think it's very much worth following for that parallel. In the U.S., Trump also and the Republican Party hasn't let go of the idea that they lost.
Right.
And, the thing that's obviously of interest is they are losing. They're on the wrong side of the vote count. And the part of the question is what they intend to do about it in terms of process and policy. But part of it is attitude. It's like, I didn't lose because I didn't accept that I lost.
Oh, well.
I'm not leaving the field. The game's not over. I know everybody's going home.
Turn those machines back on.
Something along those lines, yes.
Basically true.
So that's why this piece about Arizona was so interesting in the Times. And the piece that I pulled from, Chuck Coughlin, the Phoenix pollster who conducted the Arizona survey, said people like the ones he highlighted here, who think the election was stolen, were in firm control of the state Republican Party, in no small part because they're the ones who vote. 4 in 5 Republican primary election voters, he said, are 50 or older. And by itself, that white-hot core is not large enough to wield power in a statewide election.
Yeah.
But it's plenty large enough to advance Mr. Trump's narrative of a corrupt elite that's stealing power from the nation's true patriots, particularly when it's stoked by politicians, and I would add, favored and amplified by outlets like Fox News.
Yes.
Yeah, you can mention OAN and Newsmax, but they don't have a lot of viewership.
Right.
In fact, the viewership is falling. But, it's Fox News in the nighttime white power hour people, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham in particular, who stoke all this stuff. And that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. You have the wannabes during the day, and Fox News is orienting daytime programming to be a little bit more opinionated, a little bit less newsy.
Oh.
And so, obviously that's a big deal, and it's where people get their news, and it's why they think what they think. But there's still not enough to win elections. It's not enough in Arizona. The model that people have pointed out online that people should look at in terms of how this might work is Wisconsin, where for years the minority Republicans have just about controlled everything through gerrymandering, getting their people elected to the Supreme Court so that they could strike down anything they didn't like. Right. Democratic governors elected, they just take power away, so on and so forth. That's the model that other people are using. But it's not so clear it's going to work in Arizona. And the Times goes on to say that Arizona Republicans are ignoring the message that some of their own people that they speak to really don't like what's going on raises worrisome questions, not just about the strategy, but about the impact on an American democracy facing fundamental threats. They give an example, a fellow named Rob Goins, Goins, 57, former Marine, lifelong Republican, and a right-leaning jigsaw of golf courses, strip malls, and gated retirement communities pieced together in the Arizona desert. But ask about the Republican-backed recount, and Mr. Goins rejects the party line. There's a lot of folks out there trying to make something out of nothing. I don't think there was any fraud. My opinion to this is all a big lie. Mr. Goins is flesh and blood evidence of what political analysts here are all but shouting. The Republican State Senate's autopsy of the 2020 vote, broadly seen as a shambolic partisan effort to nurse grievances about Trump's loss here, risks driving away some of the very people the party needs to win statewide elections in 2022. So that's what's going on in Arizona. And it just really highlights the fact that where Democrats won, particularly on the presidential level, was by winning Republican-leaning suburbs. And if that's how they won, looking at 2022, a lot of what they need to do is preserve how they're doing in Republican-leaning suburbs, which are going to make people who lean a little bit more left highly annoyed. Because why is all the focus on Republican-leaning suburbs and language that would satisfy Joe Manchin? And the answer is because that's where the votes are.
I guess. All right. Well, Goins, if that is your real name, you, I don't know. I guess you know what
that's
you
who you say you are.
Right. So you claim, Mr. Goins.
But before the break, let's just get the actual poll results in. The returns to date are not encouraging for the Republican Party. A late May poll of 400 Arizonans by the consulting firm High Ground found more than 55% of respondents opposed the recount, most of them strongly, and fewer than 41% approved.
Okay. Well, once
and they were
something's
much less likely to vote for a Republican candidate who supported the review. That's where it stands.
Okay. Well, I hope they remember that. We have a long way to go before we get to 2022.
Well, it's our job to
reminding them.
That's why we're going over it.
And Republicans will help do it, too. They'll keep screwing it up. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin continues with us. There's still much more to round up from around this country, too.
Right, and I'm still going to do a few more quotes from this Times article about Arizona voters. Most of the audit's critics left little doubt about their feelings. It's a threat to our democracy. I think there's no doubt about it, said Dan Harlan, defense industry employee who changed his lifelong Republican registration to Democrat last year so he could help pick Mr. Trump's opponent. This audit is being conducted because the Republican Party refuses to look at long-term demographics and realize they can't be the party of the white male, and they're doing everything they can to maintain power. It's not about democracy, it's about winning. And when any organization becomes more concerned with maintaining itself, losing its core values, then it's no longer important.
Okay.
Jane Davis, an 89-year-old retired nurse, was a Republican for 40 years before she re-registered as an independent and voted last year for Biden. Wow. The state Senate Republicans have backed an audit, she said, to cause problems. I think it's ridiculous, and I object to their spending any taxpayer money on the review.
Oh, well.
So, you got to go where people are. You want her vote, you have to tell them that the Republicans are wasting your tax money.
Yes.
Somebody else, you might want to point out that they're trying to screw democracy. But for her, it's more important that it's wasting her tax money. But whatever convinces her.
Yeah, right.
Big tent,
She's on a fixed income. They all say that. We're all on fixed incomes.
Right.
Okay. Who's not
so
on fixed income?
That's the background. And then so Trump, over the weekend, did not have a rally, although he is planning those.
Okay.
He had a relatively
Exciting.
poorly covered, that is to say, it wasn't wall-to-wall cable news, thank goodness,
Yes.
part of a North Carolina GOP convention.
So exciting.
So the people he was speaking to weren't rally goers; they were semi-official, party people,
Right.
which represents, overall about 15% of the population. So this hardcore group of people that insist that the election was stolen and all this other stuff, who go to North Carolina GOP conventions and stuff like that, we're talking about 15% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really not that large, although they're relatively noisy. That's why it's nice to see them not covered wall to wall all the time. Cover them, but write them up in a news article. Don't put them on TV all the time. So at this particular event, this is where Lara Trump said, "Thank you very much, but I'm not running for Senate."
Huzzah.
I think what she probably could have added is, I'm going to be a lot more worried about making sure that my husband, who will be in jail, gets proper care and feeding. And so we're going to be focused on family issues for the next year or so, not so much running.
Okay.
She didn't say that, but she may well have.
We'll reserve time for her to do that later. So, yeah, all the Trumps who were going to run for Senate are dropping out because it's a horrible existence, quite
honestly. It's hard to do from jail.
Yeah, and, they're sitting allegedly on piles of money. I would just go enjoy that, even if it's fake.
They're trying to enjoy it as best they can.
Yeah, it's foolish of them to give that up for anything, really. They should have taken that advice originally.
So trying to, again, tie a lot of this stuff together started with, Israeli right-wing politics, and now we're talking about American right-wing politics. This is Amanda Carpenter writing in The Bulwark. What were they thinking about insurrection? The hopes and fears of the participants in the Capitol attack, government officials, and Donald Trump. And she actually relates the January 6th stuff, which, by the way, is not going away, to what actually happened a year prior to that, June 1st, 2020.
6 months or so. A year ago now, though, yes.
Year ago calendar. Year ago today.
But
6 months prior to that.
Right.
That was the day, she writes, Donald Trump delivered a terse Rose Garden speech threatening to deploy the U.S. military to any city or state that, quote, refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of residents, end quote. The speech was prompted by the protests that began on May 26 in Minneapolis after George Floyd was killed by the police.
Yes, okay.
Derek Chauvin, convicted murderer, by the way.
Yeah.
Trump's staff argued that the threatened military deployment would have been permitted under the Insurrection Act of 1807, which empowers the president to deploy federal troops for domestic law enforcement under certain circumstances. Like, I want it.
Right. That's a circumstance.
As Trump spoke, federal law enforcement officers, joined by officers from other local jurisdictions, clashed with protesters near Lafayette Square, just north of the White House.
They did.
Officers outfitted in riot gear pushed protesters away from the square, firing rubber bullets at them. Tear gas was used. Army helicopters buzzed the crowds. Trump then marched across the square, flanked by officials, including Mark Esper and Mark Milley. Also, Trump could have a photo op in front of St. John's Church.
Right.
So that was a big event for a number of reasons. Milley later apologized. Esper distanced himself. But Amanda Carpenter's point is that's where the Proud Boys and all the other militias started paying attention to what Trump was saying. And that's where the organizing for the January 6th insurrection and violent appearance in the Capitol really started in earnest.
I could see that.
In a Fox News appearance in September, host Janine Pirro asked Trump how he would react if he won the 2020 election and Democrats rioted. We'll put them down very quickly if we do that. We have the right, we have the power. Look, it's called insurrection. We just send in, we do it. It's easy. It's very easy. Then Trump's longtime ally Roger Stone was on Alex Jones' show and talked up the idea of Trump invoking the Insurrection Act. So there's a lot of planning that went into this, is what she's trying to say. And it wasn't necessarily done directly by Trump, but he was certainly putting the message out there. If anyone was primed to take marching orders about insurrection from the commander-in-chief, it was the Oath Keepers founder, Stuart Rhodes. Yes. To him, it must have sounded like a bugle call directly in his ears.
It was.
And it's the Oath Keepers, by the way, if you're following along, and if you're not, Marcy Wheeler is, who's the largest group of people who are involved in government prosecutions trying to tie this as a conspiracy theory.
Yes.
Not so much Proud Boys, but Oath Keepers.
The January 6th prosecutions are chiefly, the conspiracy cases are chiefly being brought against Proud Boys. And as Marcy notes, one of the things that is actually easy to parse out of her articles quickly is that a lot of the key evidence is their texts to one another saying that they expect the Insurrection Act to be invoked any minute on January 6th. And they were just awaiting that order before unloading all the guns off of their trucks. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So that was the key word for them, and that's their biggest disappointment to date about January 6th is that they were told that the Insurrection Act would in fact be invoked, and they would then be deputized to sweep in. And I don't know who they thought they were going to be brought in to shoot, because I don't know whether they still thought Antifa was around at the Capitol. But I guess for lacking of targets, they could just take care of Mike Pence instead.
Well, she points out, similarly, the head of the Florida Oath Keepers, Kelly Meggs, claimed in a December 19th Facebook
That's
post
right. That's correct.
that he had organized an alliance between Oath Keepers, Florida 3%ers, and Proud Boys, and we've decided to work together and shut this crap down.
Whatever it was. What was the crap? I'm not sure, but okay.
Right.
Yeah.
That was December 19th. On December 26th, Meggs told someone on Facebook that Trump's staying in. He's going to use the emergency broadcast system on cell phones to broadcast to the American people. Okay. Then he'll claim the Insurrection Act.
Yeah, there you go.
And when asked when this would take place, Meggs said next week and to wait to the 6th when we're all in D.C. to insurrection.
Okay. 2 weeks. That would wait 2 weeks. Better bet with Trump. So that was, she's quite correct, certainly, in terms of it being a major motivator of their thinking on January 6th. They may not have understood it, but, when has that stopped anybody?
Right. So, again, tying all this together, there's a lot still going on. There's a lot still that the government is working on, and they're doing the due diligence. It just, it takes a long time because there's a lot to this. And then there's stuff that I think at this particular point in time, they know that we don't, even though people like Morrissey can put it together based on public information. And it's just going to have to play out a little bit. That's the background behind people like Lara Trump deciding not to run.
I hope so.
Let alone the local stuff, the New York State cases against the Trump family and the Trump organization, which I think are a bigger motivator.
Yeah. I will say we're not all on the same page here yet, though, by the way. I want to point out that something we discussed at the end of last week, and I don't know, probably in 10 o'clock segments after you were done some days. But one of the big problems with what she's pointing out here is that for whatever reason, I can kind of explain it, but it's not a good or heartening explanation, but the current position of the Biden Justice Department is that the use of force on January 1st June 1st last year, when Trump ordered Lafayette Square cleared for his photo op, is entirely justified. They are in court defending that position and seeking to dismiss lawsuits against the various officials who, generally speaking, abused their power that day. And we're finding that the Biden Justice Department, for institutional reasons, because the Justice Department is institutionally programmed to protect the prerogatives of the executive branch, regardless of who's there or who's been there in the past. And in this case, it might not be a particularly good idea to do this. But Their position is, of course, maximalist, because they want to grab and hold on to as much power as possible. But, the whole case rests on if the president, whether it's Trump or anybody else, says, their position now is, if the president says there's a protest that I don't like somewhere, I would like to go and take a picture of myself holding a Bible right where they are, then the cops can do anything up to and including machine gunning the crowd down to protect the president's safety without any test of why does the president want to go there to hold a book? It's a church, but he didn't try to go in. He didn't read anything out of the Bible. He didn't do anything or declare anything once he got there. He just wanted protesters shot. And that really, I mean, going forward, that should not be the Justice Department position. I just want to talk to Merrick about that.
Yep. So, again, it's complicated, and you're right. You put your finger on it. The institutional view of protecting our prerogatives, whatever they are, no matter how bad, sometimes comes in conflict with, but this thing happened, and you really ought to be doing something about it. And, of course, not everybody changes over when you have an early administration.
That's true,
so some of the holdouts there are actually protecting themselves.
That could certainly be a possibility. But, by the way, their other part of the defense was, well, it won't happen again because Trump's gone.
It won't happen again then because that date is gone.
Right.
Something like it might happen in the future.
Right.
But,
that's kind of the whole law
hypothetical
thing.
That we're not going to address at this point.
Yeah, you want to tie that in and say, how will this affect the future going forward? Like, hypothetically speaking, what if it did happen again? Well, it won't because my calendar has been thrown out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
So,
right.
There's a lot of churn going on, below the surface of the relatively quiet summer stuff that's happening here. People are opening up. They're getting used to being out and around. It's all good. The economy's looking like it's okay. There's no major giant issues going on right now other than the Democrats trying to get their agenda passed and Joe Manchin saying, I don't think so. One of the interesting things about that, and it's so hard to really weigh in on what's actually going on, Manchin has made it very clear he doesn't want to get rid of the filibuster, but he's also made it very clear he much prefers the John Lewis Act over the For the People Act.
Yes.
And arguably, the For the People Act is a bit of a flawed attempt,
People do argue it.
A good faith attempt to try to get a handle on election administration, whereas the John Lewis Act is a lot more trying to deal with Voting Rights Act and making sure that, as Manchin sees it, it's passed everywhere. It's no good to say that, southern states need to have Voting Rights Act review. Just make all states do that. Then you're not singling out the southern states. And I'm okay with that. And in fact, I'll even recruit Lisa Murkowski and try to recruit Republicans to vote for that. And that seems to be the position he's staked out. Now, how that lasts and what happens when he can't get anybody besides Murkowski, I don't know. But that appears to be the decision that he's making right now. And with so many different pieces going on, including the infrastructure piece, I'm just having a hard time telling you my true feelings about Joe Manchin, who, in fact, is a Democrat in a state named West by God, Virginia, which is, let's say, different than Connecticut in terms of where their political center is.
Maybe.
I mean, he's doing things that fit West Virginia, which is
not shape West Virginia.
Not necessarily best for the Democratic Party.
No, he's been pretty frustrating, and that also occupied a lot of people's Sundays, right up to the pants thing.
Well, that's because Manchin wrote an op-ed in his local paper saying, "I'm not voting for the People Act, and I won't get rid of the filibuster." So he said that in so many words, for months, but he actually put it in writing on the weekend.
Yes, so I guess that's worth something. It's a reason to talk. I don't have any. I actually have nothing to add on Manchin. I don't know what to tell you about the guy, and he doesn't want to do that. I did see somebody had some interesting thoughts on the meta issues involved, but there's a guy he's a stick in the mud, and I don't know what to do with him. We got to work around him.
What he's doing is putting himself at the center of everything, which is not unreasonable or unusual for a senator.
We haven't moved to anything else, and I don't know if it's a great idea to turn the page. He might end up putting himself at the center of everything, but we've only been working on like 3 things this whole time.
Yeah. Right. So there are some things that have passed, like the COVID relief bill. There's things that appear to pass or are going to pass, like the big semi-protectionist bill, which is a so-called China policy.
Yeah, although... Yeah.
Good, not good, I don't know. But there are some things that are moving. And again, there's so many different moving parts, it's not unusual in the Senate to say, well, I'm not really going to, torch him on this because I need him on that. And again, with so many different moving parts, the whole big picture really hasn't come into focus, as they say.
Okay. Yes, I think that's a good reminder. Yeah, we always, every time we involve a bill, or I noticed something else over the weekend. I was looking back at something else for other reasons and just realizing, I think I was looking at the various points in time in which the Republicans screamed that something the Democrats were doing procedurally was the totally, absolutely 100% the end of the Senate as we know it, and just democracy's been destroyed. And the number of times that has not happened following it. Just, I think in terms of reaction to the Manchin thing about the filibuster and how he claims that it would, ruin the Senate, end it as we know it, and Republicans play on that. But I would say probably about 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years they've declared the Senate completely dead, and there's no difference now between the Senate and the House, and yet nothing seems to be changing in the Senate. Maybe they're just crying wolf every time.
Yeah, maybe.
But the last time
anyway,
I noticed was about a China
the
bill.
Onion sums it up pretty well looking at Kirsten Sinema. Same thing.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Kirsten Sinema defends Senate filibuster as necessary for her to stay politically relevant.
Yes. Well, that's probably true.
I mean, that is true.
Yeah.
It's true for both of them.
Yeah. I mean, he's been in that role for longer, and we now expect it of him. But and that's why people mention him and forget sometimes.
I mean, if there was no filibuster, who cares what Joe Manchin thinks?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
you still be, because you still need
right.
50 votes.
Yeah,
sometimes
you would still
51.
be looking. But then we'd have a vote, and then we would just find out, like, hey, Manchin is against this.
Yeah,
that's bad.
That's all.
Yeah, and we could, you could try to win him over with favors or horse trading or something like that. And I don't know.
Anyway,
Cinema,
elections
no one knows
matter.
what to do.
2022 is rapidly, coming into at least view in the distance there. And since elections matter, and who controls which chamber matters a lot, as we can see right now, it's every reason to stay engaged. And there's going to be people that you elect on your side that you're not going to like, but the alternative is electing people on the other side who you're not going to like even more.
Right.
And so, pay attention to how the stuff in Arizona plays out, particularly with those suburban areas that Democrats are going to need in order to win. Because, to be blunt about it, if you're just going to make this a white people versus non-white people election, which is what the Republicans and Fox News Evening are really, really trying to do, they still have the numbers.
All right, for the time being, I guess.
For the time being,
people writing books that saying
but certainly in terms of where they are,
yeah,
not just how many they are and how they're distributed, and so keeping the House is going to be paramount in terms of trying to make sure democracy survives. And I would argue the same thing with the Senate, and that's especially true with all the disappointments we're about to see from the Supreme Court. So stay engaged.
Yes.
It's sometimes depressing because you haven't won anything, even though you won. It doesn't feel like you won, and that's because there's still a lot going on, and there's still more work to do.
Okay. Yeah, there's plenty.
Approach it the way Ben Wickler does in Wisconsin. The GOP controls everything there, and nonetheless, he took it upon himself to say, well, we can be organized and we can do well as well. And there's now a Democratic governor. That's a big help, but it's not everything.
Right.
And there's still more work to do, and that includes getting rid of some of their, senators.
Yeah, right. And he's working on that. Yeah, he's doing a fantastic job there. One of the, I think, the top examples that everybody points to in terms of state-level party leaders.
Right.
Very good.
So, that's the model in terms of stay engaged. So that's my rant for today.
Okay.
And, it's an international rant, I suppose you might say. But
yes,
a lot going. I think it's just fascinating to point out that part of the reason the parallels between Netanyahu and Trump are being drawn isn't just the way that they act, but it's that they lost.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good kind of parallel. I like that. I guess pants watch is on for Netanyahu.
Yes, for Netanyahu. So we're talking about what happens when you lose and how you act when you lose, and that's fine because it meant you lost.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as long as that's the case, I guess I'll I'll take it. Then of course you have to worry about insurrections and whatnot.
Well, it's depressing watching the way they lose after they lost, but the nice thing is they lost. Yeah. I just thought I'd remind you.
It's a good way to start. Okay. And yes, you're right. Supreme Court, I think, is that was another thing people wrung their hands over the weekend. Many decisions due out. They're starting to tumble out of the court right as we speak. So, yeah, maybe tomorrow will be a stomach-churning day about that as well. But we should be done before that happens.
I would think so.
All right.
Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you on
You get
Wednesday.
to escape now. Excellent. All right. We're looking forward to it, and we'll see you then, although we actually never see you. But, whatever. Okay. Let's see. Other directions that things that you've set us up for could take us. I know one idea here. You know what? I keep thinking about turning down the sound, and I got all ready to turn down the sound because for whatever reason that little bloop sound disturbs Greg for whatever reason, which, I don't know. Sounds like we could eliminate it and be super. We need like a hang-up click noise or something. Skype doesn't make that noise, and you don't hear that on the radio, but it adds finality to things. But I went to turn it down, but then I thought, what if I turn down the sound and then Greg tries to say something, just before I go, and then the sound is down. So I'm just going to leave the bloops in there from now on, and I don't know, maybe we could edit it out of the podcast, and that would make him happy, although I can't imagine that's where he's hearing it either. Okay. Anyway, one of the things that, some breaking news, we'll say this. I mean, I don't know that we're going to change our direction here, but The Hill, which loves to tweet pictures at me and catch my eye because I'm basically a squirrel at this point, says the breaking news is that the Supreme Court has declined a suit alleging that the male-only military draft is discriminatory. So that's not a case decision per se. That's the decision not to take a case, which pretty much ends the case. So it's of import. And it's also pretty easy to interpret, and the reporters don't have to try to read the decision on the air and figure out what it means and make mistakes. So there you go. That's first one out of the box that I've seen. Probably more to come, but it'll probably be Tuesday before we can digest these things properly. What I was going to play off of with Greg's discussion was another tweet thread that's going to lead us down a rabbit hole for a little while, but tie together some threads here. But, when we have to do these things this way and explain who's tweeting in response to whom and blah, 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 and it's 3 layers deep, it sometimes takes a little while to straighten this out. I happen to see Greg Sargent tweeting this morning in response to Jay Rosen, who was himself tweeting in response to a Timothy Snyder Substack article, which I could read to you. I think that's at the root of what's going on here today, except I don't know who Timothy Snyder is. And if I read his Substack, your own Substack is not a place where you will explain who you are, generally speaking. People are there because they know who you are and agree with you and want to hear what you have to say or value what you have to say. They may not always agree with you. So someone else will have to take care of that part. Who's Timothy Snyder? And I'll feel foolish for asking that question, and you'll feel like I'm foolish for having to answer it. But let's see. What I've got in mind here. And now I just saw somebody else retweeting the same thing, so I didn't have to dig through my pocket to get it. Greg Sargent retweets Jay Rosen. Jay Rosen retweeting Timothy Snyder. I think the place to start here is Rosen saying, I agree with Timothy Snyder. This is where it's going. Then Timothy will tell us where this is. And there is presently nothing on the horizon that would stop it. And Timothy is talking about the possibility of the Republican takeover and elimination, essentially, and, the scenario we've all been talking about, the end of democracy. Greg Sargent is retweeting it because he says yes, and people are, election law experts agree that this scenario is a live threat. And here's my own article from earlier in May about the same subject. And now we get down to the subject itself. Tim Snyder explaining what he sees, the troubling things on the horizon. And I was fascinated by this, not because this is news to me, but really mostly about reactions to it and to Jay Rosen's declaration that he thinks, Snyder is largely right about that. I don't know whether the same thing happened when Greg Sargent said, I also agree that Jay Rosen is right to agree that Tim Snyder has got things right. But it was kind of fascinating watching, good liberals and progressives feel differently about it. And I wonder, whether we're prepared for what's coming. Anyway, Tim Snyder writes this bit, 9/11 and 1/6, how an American nightmare becomes real. And this, by the way, drives Republicans up the wall. They're very upset that anybody would compare 11/6 to 9/11. That really ticks them off. And so maybe it's a good idea to keep doing it just for that reason. And as a matter of fact, I guess now we're running up against our break, so maybe now is not the time to dive into it exactly, but maybe we'll set it up as a teaser and then return to it. Tim writes about things this way. A moment ago, I woke up from a nightmare about 9/11. Okay. And in his nightmare, he says, I was visiting the Empire State Building in New York when an airplane crashed into it from the side. Obviously, pretty much the same thing except the Empire State Building. The whole building buckled for a moment, and then nothing else seemed to happen. This is the interesting and intriguing part. I was by myself, without any friends or family, and I just ran down to the exit, staircase after staircase. Getting out was the thing to do, but no one else was doing it. So right in his dream, no one else is running down the staircase to get out. They're just like, hey, that's funny. The building shook. You see what's going on here? I think this sense of inertia during an emergency was something that stayed with me from the real 9/11 when the World Trade Center was attacked. When the first building was hit, it was somehow not clear that the second building should also be evacuated. Yeah, I remember that very well, and people were still thinking, maybe it was an accident. I recall, being told to turn on the TV. A plane crashed into the World Trade Center, but it was said like a small plane. Because what other plane would crash into the World Trade Center, right? We turned it on, and then I remember watching it and saying, oh my God, and that must have been a huge plane. And by the time you realized it was an airliner, the next one was there. So I could see how that could happen. Anyway, you get the idea, you get the setup. We'll be right back to read the substance of it after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ah, boy. All right, let's see if we can't straighten this out. We'll read on in Timothy Snyder's setup here, the 9/11 and 1/6 nightmare. Again, he's describing having a nightmare in which he is in the Empire State Building when a 9/11 style attack takes place and a jetliner is smashed into the side of the building. Huge jolt. He realizes he's got to get out, and he runs down the staircase, but no one else is going. What's going on? And as he says, I think it carries over from the real 9/11 when the first building was hit, and it was somehow not clear that the second building should also be evacuated. In my dream about the Empire State Building, there was no siren. When I got to the lobby, people were just milling around, and all of the doors were closed and locked. There seemed to be no way out. One handicapped entrance was opened for a moment to allow a woman in a wheelchair to come in. In the dream, I felt a little guilty as I squeezed by her and went the wrong way through the door. The doors closed again. No one else left the building. My example did not make a difference. They were all going to die. Do you see what's happening? I somehow ended up in a nearby building, some kind of tourist center where people waited before entering the Empire State Building. Inside was a group of senior citizens waiting for a tour of the building. I tried to explain to them what was happening. If people would not leave the Empire State Building, at least more should not go in. But I was just a guy. I wasn't wearing any uniform. I didn't have a microphone, and they didn't pay attention. They gave me that look people give you when you are the entertainment and the entertainment is not good. They hadn't seen the plane hit the building, and they thought I was some sort of nut. A lady to my left, I'm surprised he remembers that it's to his left, wearing a red, white, and blue dress and with some kind of red, white, and blue ornament in her hair, started laughing at me. They were going to have their tour. In the dream, I knew that the building was going to come down, and there seemed to be nothing I could do. The problem was as clear as day, but no one wanted to see it. People preferred to risk everything rather than believe that there was a risk. With the senior citizens were 2 security guards. They had seen the plane hit, but they could somehow not draw the conclusions. They wanted to talk to me about how it could have happened. Wasn't it just some kind of accident? Wasn't someone in charge? And wouldn't everything somehow be okay in the end? Are your dreams as easy to analyze as mine? I sometimes have in real life that Cassandra feeling that I had in the dream when I predicted that Russia would invade Ukraine in 2014. When I broke the story of Trump and Russia in 2016. When I asked people to work against American regime change in 2017. And I predicted in 2020 that Trump would try some sort of coup to stay in power, or tried to explain that his big lie would be his legacy. The obvious trigger of this dream was the Senate vote preventing an investigation of the domestic insurgency of 1/6. The proposal was modeled after the 9/11 Commission, which is why 9/11 was on my mind. 9/11 is unforgettable. Nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives. By the way, just about 1/210th of what's gone on so far with coronavirus, but hey. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 raised questions about foreign policy and airport security. The terrorist attack of 1/6 raised deeper questions about how our country is governed and who we have become as a people. In 2001, speaking in the House of Representatives, President Bush said that Al-Qaeda hated, quote, what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. That is what we wanted to hear, because it meant that we were attacked because we were the good guys. That probably really wasn't what Al-Qaeda had in mind on 9/11, but it was what Americans had in mind on 1/6. This is an interesting passage here too, right? They stormed the very chamber in which President Bush spoke, and they were there to halt the procedures of a democracy. They were attacking precisely democratically elected government. Of course, I guess if you ask them, they would have said, no, the reason we're attacking it is because it's, yes, government, but no, it's not democratic because they stole the vote. We really won it, but, the plain fact of it was, no, in fact, you lost. But there was no convincing them of that. Anyway, I have the Cassandra feeling this spring because it is so obvious where all of this is heading. President Trump tells a big lie that the elections are rigged. Thus, this authorizes, supposedly, I guess, authorizes in his mind him and others to seek power in extra democratic ways. Not like, boy, that's extra democratic. You've done a great job adding more democracy, but rather outside of the democratic norm. Extra, like extra legal or extrajudicial. This is extra democratic ways. The lie is institutionalized by state legislation that suppresses voting and that gives state legislatures themselves the right to decide how to allocate the electoral vote in presidential elections. The scenario then goes like this. The Republicans win back the House and the Senate in 2022, in part thanks to voter suppression. The Republican candidate in 2024 loses the popular vote by several million and the electoral vote by the margin of a few states. State legislatures claiming fraud alter the electoral vote count. The House and Senate accept that altered count. That's where things change in the scenario here. You've switched over to Republican control of those institutions at that point. The losing candidate becomes the president. We no longer have a democratically elected government, and people are angry. No one is seeking to hide that this is the plan. It is right there out in the open. The prospective Republican candidates for 2024, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, are all running on a big lie platform. If your platform is that elections do not work, you are saying that you intend to come to power some other way. The big lie is designed not to win an election, but to discredit one. Any candidate who tells it is alienating most Americans and preparing a minority for a scenario where fraud is claimed. This is just what Trump tried to do in 2020, and it led to a coup attempt in January of 2021. It will be worse in January of 2025. 9/11 led us to the invasion of Iraq, the foreign policy disaster that marked our century. 1/6 leads us to a catastrophe on that scale, but inside our own country. It is not at all clear that the plan to take power undemocratically will work, but it is clear that it will generate a lot of resistance. African Americans are right now being told the absurd lie that the problem in America is that it is too easy for them to vote. As the scenario plays out, all Americans will face an open denial of everything they have been told about their country. In such a scenario, it is not clear what the armed forces or civil servants would do. Most likely, they would fracture, I guess like everybody else, right? An oath to defend the Constitution is hard to honor when it's unclear what it means. Both those who were stealing an election and those who were defending votes would claim that the Constitution was on their side. The Supreme Court would rule, but would anyone pay attention? Those who have decided to overthrow democracy believe that the court is on their side, which is why they are proceeding as they are. If they were proven wrong in January 2025, it would be too late. They would not change course. Those who are defending voting rights expect the court to rule against voting, since that is what it generally does. If the court rules against voting in the setting of anti-democratic regime change, this will seem screamingly illegitimate to a very large number of Americans. No court, no constitution. No constitution, no rule of law. No rule of law, widespread violence. The collapse of the United States follows. When Trump told his big lie, the airplane hit the building. What unfolds from there has a certain logic. It can be stopped, but only if it is understood. Everything happens fast. It is so easy to look away, to imagine it was all an accident, to think that institutions will save us. They will only save us if we save them first. The anti-voter laws proposed and passed by Republican state legislatures around the country move this scenario to its next step. Halting them might well be the only way to halt the scenario as a whole. Businesses that want to avoid chaos between now and 2022 and prevent system breakdown in 2024 would be well advised not to donate to politicians who repeat the big lie and suppress the vote. We have to act now. That is what no one wants to hear. We want to believe in American democracy. We want to take pride in new laws, a growing economy, the end of COVID. I get all that. I want to feel that way too. I have not yet figured out how to tell this story. I think you did. In waking life, I feel as I did in the dream, facing those senior citizens. I couldn't convince a single one of them. And so I just stood in the doorway and kept talking and woke up in the middle of the night and wrote this. So there you go. It's very interesting. And I guess we could read the comments here in the Substack, but I saw for sure that there were some interesting reactions on Twitter. And I mostly resisted my usual urge to stop and comment along the way so we could get the full piece in there. And now, of course, there are thoughts that occurred to me that I think we should, perhaps go back and discuss. But let me jump back out to the, how we came to this. Remember, this was Jay Rosen tweeting this link saying, I agree with Timothy Snyder. This is where it's going, and there's presently nothing on the horizon that would stop it. And then Greg Sargent retweeting that and saying, yeah. And I wrote about that in early May. And he did, and it bears reading or repeating. But let's just stick with what Snyder has written here for a moment and Rosen's agreement with it, because I found it pretty interesting that among the reactions were, oh yeah, 100%, you're right, I've thought so since forever, and a little bit of, well, I thought even before you. Well, I thought before you. Look at this. I wrote this in. So there's a little bit of that going on. But then there's also reaction like, nah, I disagree. And, from good, respectable, liberal, progressive people but I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. But other people saying, for instance, okay, here's one. I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but Melissa Byrne, who is a blue check-marked kind of person, from, well, are you from Wisconsin? These pictures look like they're from those protests in Madison where they had those light up letters, and I'm not certain if that's actually where she's from, but at any rate, no, well, Philly is where she's from, but I think she just likes these protests, or else maybe they got those signs in Philadelphia as well. But just saying, I disagree to Jay. I think this is what people who like to play tabletop games think. And then their worry influences outcomes and creates panic. Like, is that legitimately, are you actually saying, yeah, I don't really think Republicans are going to try and do anything like that? Because, I don't know. I mean, I disagree with that. But I guess we're going to leave it at being civil. I disagree with your disagreement. I do think this is a serious problem. There was another one that actually sparked reaction from me, and I just thought I would share it. Just again, this time, just a regular, everyday, normal, non-blue check person like you and me, Ken Blair, saying in response to Jay Rosen saying, "Yeah, I think this is going to happen." He says, "If that scenario happens," I mean, I hear this all over the place. People say this all the time. It's nothing wrong with Ken for saying it, but he says, "If this scenario happens, people will take to the streets." And there will be massive unrest, a dividing of the nation. You left that part out. Jay comes back and answers, I didn't really leave that out. I think, first of all, I'm just telling you that I think Timothy Snyder did a good job in writing this up. Second of all, as Jay points out, Snyder does address that, and he says that it's likely to go that way. It's not that we were ignoring that there would be massive discontent with it. But I will say this, as I did on Twitter, I was like, people will take to the streets. Like, man, I just don't even know. I mean, we have in the past taken to the streets, but I've also been around long enough, and so have you, because it's a recent past, to see massive numbers of people taking to the streets and having it be, like, ignored. Like, massive amounts of people took to the streets in protest of the launch of the Iraq War. Or even the war in Afghanistan, actually, people protested. But by the time we got around to Iraq, there was massive protest here and around the world. And it was not only mostly ignored, but when it was reported in the newspapers, it was kind of like, look at these hippie dummies that don't know that the right thing to do is to invade Iraq. And, I mean, it's been a long time coming that now everybody is kind of like, wow, see, as Tim Snyder put it, it's not like you had to convince him of anything, but even Donald Trump says, the Iraq war was some kind of huge debacle and a mistake. And we now sort of generally agree on that, but millions of people were in the street for that, and nothing. When Donald Trump was elected, millions of people went into the street, right? Of course, there was the women's marches. All of this, one of the biggest mass mobilizations in recent history, certainly in the United States. And those too happened around the world. And maybe it's unfair to say, and then what happened? Because I don't know that they were particularly aimed at anything. There was some political organizing behind them too, and no doubt it made a difference. It changed control of the House of Representatives, and then led up to 2024 and the defeat eventually and removal of Donald Trump. But I mean, there were millions of people in the street, sure, but and then after that. Protests after George Floyd's murder. And again, certainly the biggest, broadest based mobilization of Black Lives Matter protesters we've ever seen. And again, here and around the world. But, a lot of things are buts on that issue. Including the fact that, here's what occurred to me. As Ken says, people will take to the streets and there'll be massive unrest. Take to the streets. Where it is now, these same streets, by the way, legal in several states for you to run over the people who have taken to the streets. Or, combine that with, well, I have an AR-15, sure, but I was in fear for my life when I saw the people taking to the streets, and so I machine gunned them all. Or certainly threatened to. I'm a little concerned about, relying on this as the reaction. Like millions of people in the streets, and it's legal to kill you in the streets now. The guy who came out of his house with his wife with all of their guns in tow in St. Louis because people were taking to the streets, but they didn't like the idea that they were taking to their street, and they waved their guns at them, is now a serious candidate for Senate in Missouri on the Republican side, of course. And, of course, people are running for election all over the country as Republicans on the premise that they will undo all of the restraint that other Republicans showed. I will shoot those protesters. I will find those 8,000 votes for Donald Trump. I will overturn our state election results in the state legislature. They want to do that. But specifically about the streets, between this and now you can run over protesters and you can shoot protesters, as Kyle Rittenhouse did, and then be celebrated by police and let out on work release and taken out to bars drinking, people raising toasts to your murder of protesters. I don't know about how many people are going to take to the streets or what value taking to the streets actually may have. Not that I would discourage you from doing it if we arrived at this scenario, but I'm not so certain that the answer is necessarily as clear as all that the people would take to the streets, and therefore what? I don't know. I can't promise you anything. And of course, add to that, on top of it all, that, the current position of the current Biden Department of Justice is that if people take to the streets and the president, whoever he happens to be at the time, says the right magic words or indicates the right magic formula, they can shoot you, gas you, rubber bullets, or just plain live ammunition. If the president says, I want to go to the exact spot where those people are protesting, they can kill you to make it happen. That's what the Justice Department is saying. Now, I think that if they actually did that, the Justice Department would probably find themselves in an uncomfortable position and probably have to back down. Or maybe they wouldn't back down, but the courts would force them to back down. Maybe. But maybe they won't. I just want to point out that the mechanism of saying, but if that happened, there would be massive unrest. Well, there might be. But there might also be massive suppression of that unrest very quickly, and you might see that unrest grow into private hand-wringing about how normally I would be in the streets, or of course there's always the possibility of being in the streets and having the newspapers say, The Bachelor is more important than this, and we're just going to cover that instead. Look at all these, do you want us to write about the crazy hippies who are in the street? Fine. Write a little thing about how stupid hats that they're wearing or whatever. I just was kind of surprised that there were that number of reactions in Jay's comments about, we'll take care of it. It'll be fine. Greg Sargent, when he reacted, was just by way of referring you to the article that he was talking about, was his May 5th piece, How GOP Rage at Liz Cheney Makes a Future Stolen Election More Likely. The headline, peripherally on point, but I think the substance of the article is much the same. Yes, they can just decide, once they have control of Congress, if that's what happens, that they will simply do, they'll do the things that everybody said, Mike Pence can't do that. And Mike Pence apparently agreed that Mike Pence couldn't do that on January 6th. But on January 6th, 2025, it won't be Mike Pence. Of course, true, it will be Kamala Harris, but who knows whether they'll even let her in the building. But even if it is Kamala Harris in the chair, it won't be her in the chair in the House chamber where they select the president, voting by states if they manage to, deadlock the Electoral College or make it inconclusive. Can they do it? Yeah, no, yes, no, I don't know. Legally, probably not. Armando has spoken a number of times about how he thinks that the Electoral Count Act under which they would seek to operate is probably unconstitutional anyway. But, again, nothing's unconstitutional until you can get the Supreme Court to agree that it is. And at that point, the Supreme Court would be inclined not to agree that it was, so you have a problem. But yeah, you can just use blunt force of superior numbers in the House without any justification, whether that, either entirely without justification or with a bogus justification or whatever. If you've got the numbers, it won't matter. And I've told you about that a number of times. I've taken heat from Republicans and conservatives for pointing it out, usually in the context of my saying, well, if their theory, or my theory for that matter, of what raw power can do in the House and Senate is really true, then you could pull stunts like this. And usually it was stuff outraging Republicans, and they fumed / laughed that what I was describing was totally impossible, and then tried to do it themselves, which I can't knock them for. It was a good idea. They just tried to adopt it for themselves. I'll tell you what I'm talking about, in case you aren't able to figure it out, because there's a lot of moving parts and this and things we've discussed a long time ago. Do you remember way back when Donald Trump was first quote-unquote elected, and we were sitting on the still then pending nomination of Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court, and Mitch McConnell had blocked it for over a year, and everyone was outraged, and democratic norms, constitutional norms were at stake, and all of those things. And I said, if you really, really, really wanted to be hard-ass about this and really play constitutional hardball, you could try something like this. I don't know how the rulings would go, and I don't know how your caucus would be in terms of standing firm with you and doing what needed to be done, and given that Joe Manchin would be one of them at the time, maybe it would be tenuous. And that may be the reason why you never try anything like that. But the real reason was, oh my God, this would just set off a chain reaction that would eventually destroy democracy, possibly. So you want to be careful about those things. But with the nomination of Merrick Garland still pending, some people said, let's have the president declare, force the Congress into recess, or when they recess in between the dissolution of the previous Congress and the seating of the new Congress, even though they only, are out of session technically for a second, you should try to force through the recess appointment of Merrick Garland to the bench. And there were a lot of other problems that came up with that. But, why not? Go for it. You can give it a shot, right? But if that doesn't work, what are you going to do? And there were plenty of reasons to think it wouldn't work. The Supreme Court had recently severely curtailed the ability of the president, because the president was then Barack Obama, to make recess appointments. And there's prior cases about this, but Supreme Court, any court nomination made during a recess is highly suspect, because, of course, the appointments to the federal bench, the regular federal bench, the Article 3 federal bench, not, tax courts, etc. Leave all that stuff out. But appointments to the federal bench are supposed to be lifetime appointments. But if you make one an explicitly recess appointment, well, recess appointments have their own set of rules, and those recess appointments have an end date. And how do you reconcile the fact that you're appointing someone through a mechanism that has an end date built into it, and the fact that you're appointing them to a job that has no end date built into it, and in fact has it built into it that it's a lifetime appointment? Although people have argued about that as well. Anyway, so that becomes a problem. But anyway, so let's say it didn't work for whatever reason. I had described, well, at the moment that the prior Congress, the terms of the prior Congresses end on January 3rd, and before you then try to convene the next Congress and swear in all the new members and all the new members of the Senate, there's a moment there, and we're big into magic moments at the beginning of a new Congress when we think about these things, but this grew out of the old constitutional option description, the Gupta Gold description of the constitutional option that became the nuclear option. But the old style one, where it all happens on the first day of a new Congress, it depended on a slightly different mechanism than what has become the nuclear option that we've used. And maybe you remember this, but the idea was at that time, when the terms of the prior Congress end, but before new senators have been sworn in, there would be only 66 sworn members of the Senate. And all 66, of course, would be presided over at that time by then still Vice President Joe Biden. and he could presumably attempt to control the timing of the recognition of the newly elected members of the Senate and swearing them in. And before they were sworn in, he could at that moment say, just hold on a second, before we bring in the new members in here, the 66 of you who are still in the Senate, I have a question for you. Do you think Merrick Garland should be confirmed to the Supreme Court, yes or no? Oh, look at that. We made it, and we got the job done. And there was outrage. That could not possibly happen. And by the way, same people 4 years later saying, oh, you know what we can do? We can just have Mike Pence not count the electoral vote, and that will change everything. He'll be reinstated by August.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So did you follow what we were talking about before? I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing. And I was re-examining some of that, and just generally speaking, thinking about some of the people who insisted that whole scenario was crazy. And it was crazy. I mean, in the sense that if you think Democrats are going to do this, you're crazy. But it was really offered more along the lines of, just remember, by the way, that there are lots of ways to, even within the rules, to do things that people say, well, that just can't, that's not the way it, but it gets done, and it's not clear how or whether you can undo it. And anyway, I think that was an example of something quite like that. I didn't think even in a million years the Democrats would actually come around and do something like that, but you remember the basic premise of it. And I counted up among the 66 senators who would still be there, how many would you have who were Democrats and how many would you have who were Republicans. And it was just particularly advantageous. And it's not something you can pull all the time in the middle of every Congress. It wouldn't necessarily become something that, that happens every 2 years now. Because it could. You'd probably, if you did it and it worked, you would probably see someone trying to emulate it for something. And probably pretty frequently until they did something to make it harder to do or whatever. So I'm not saying that would be the beginning and end of it. But yeah, as it happens, it worked out that way because of the number of Democratic versus Republican held seats that were at stake that year and who had won them. And, and people worried, well, wouldn't the Republicans then in 2018 simply do the same thing back to us in some other fashion with some other very important thing? And, the answer to that was, well, in 2 years, a different set of senators are up for re-election and a different set will be leaving and a different set coming in. And it's hard to tell, but it doesn't really look like in 2018 the Republicans would have a big enough majority at that moment among the 66 to get done what they wanted to get done. Or, whatever you might imagine they want to try to get done. It doesn't always work out that way, but it works out that way enough that I guess it wouldn't be. It's not a great idea, and it wasn't. You can't predict the future, and lots of ill will, of course, would have been created by something like that. But mostly I thought it was interesting was that, to no one's surprise, when the shoe was on the other foot, suddenly these ideas of let's try something. I know the rules say you're not allowed to do that, but what if we just did it anyway? Suddenly now looked like a great idea. to Republicans in Washington rioting on 1/6. In other words, any of the things that you thought you could pull on 1/6 actually probably were more legitimate to try to pull on 1/3. But among the members of the House and Senate who can determine, actually have constitutional prerogative to determine the rules of their own proceedings, they'd stand on much better, much firmer ground than the idea that, well, on 1/6, the vice president, who is not at all even close to empowered to do this thing, should simply do this thing. If it said somewhere in the Constitution that the power of the vice president in performing the electoral count is unlimited, then you would have something, which you didn't. But in my January 3rd scenario, you did. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting, and just serves as a reminder to people like, yeah, if you're willing to just try to power your way through these things and say, fine, let the courts sort it out. We control the courts, or, whatever. I mean, even that my scenarios now begin to fall apart a little bit, because if you believe in the totally over-politicized Supreme Court, a lot of these scenarios that I've explained, either in explaining the nuclear option to people or explaining this judicial appointment scenario to people, all depends on the Supreme Court being unwilling to take a case adjudicating the questions that arise, because under the political doctrine question, that these are political questions and that the political branches need to solve them, and that the judicial branch cannot intervene. The Constitution is clear in giving each House of Congress the right to determine the rules of its own proceedings. It's black and white, and even conservative-leaning Republican, outright, obvious, blatant, open Republicans on the Supreme Court, because they were conservatives, would say the conservative black and white position in the Constitution here is that we don't interfere in this. But now I no longer believe that would be the case. I think it would be a lot. It will be a lot easier to understand or to imagine constitutional and political conservatives saying, "Yeah, but I want to win, and so therefore I need to come to the opposite conclusion that my principles in prior writing would have led you to believe I would land on." I now no longer believe in the political question doctrine. And yes, when the shoe is on the other foot and Democrats are trying to take advantage of this ruling, I will say, no, you can't do that because it was a one-time thing, Bush v. Gore, go away. I will do that. So, in some sense, a lot of this is a little unpredictable, you might say. But anyway, there you go. I just thought I would throw that out there and remind people that, if you're relying on things like, or saying, well, this is a ridiculous scenario because people will take to the streets. Keeping in mind that, one, it's legal to run you over in the streets now. Two, that it's legal to threaten you with semi-automatic weapons, maybe with bump stocks, maybe not. That's a thing that you can do with people in the streets because you fear for your life. The president can order the streets swept clean with guns if he decides he wants to go there, even if he later changes his mind and doesn't go there, for instance. There's an enormous amount of state power that can be brought to bear to make sure that you are not safe protesting in the streets and that you stop doing it and leave immediately. And if you really want to get, fantastical about it, you might say, well, wait till the new president and or governors aligned with him start pardoning people who killed you in the streets. Why? I don't know. Because Fox News said I should. Remember, we don't care about the why. We don't ask. It's not part of the inquiry. You can pardon Roger Stone and Mike Flynn and all the actors who helped plan the insurrection. You can pardon people who helped you collude with Russia. You can pardon people who gave you $100,000. Whatever you want. It never used to be the case. No one would ever, but now they are. So maybe they pardon people who kill you for taking to the streets. Maybe they don't need to pardon you because it's legal to run you over. Whatever. Maybe it'll work just fine because some of the people who are in the habit of going out in the streets to threaten to kill people who take to the streets are in the Senate now, for instance, or whatever. There's a lot of really shady stuff that can happen once you throw out the book, is what I'm saying. And you don't even have to get there to make putting Democrats, anyway, out in the streets uninteresting to the powers that be and the newspapers that cover them. Just want to throw that out there. All right, so we can move on, if you want, to many other things which are interesting and exciting, although somewhat smaller bore than that discussion. But let's just see where they land. I'm going to take a look at some of the other things I put aside here. Smaller bore, yes, but very interesting. Let me read this here. I got this tweet from Patrick Snyder earlier today, and then lots of people chiming in, agreeing with him that it was, in fact, a good thread explaining this weird story. What is this weird story? For the background of the story, I turn to The Hill, which everyone hates, but because they tweet pictures, it works very well. That's a great way to get my attention. This is the story. Mo Brooks, that jackass from Alabama, who's like turns up like the Forrest Gump everywhere. He's Alabama, so it makes sense. But somehow inserts himself into everything. Mo Brooks served with a lawsuit papers by Eric Swalwell of California, and I vaguely remember that this was happening, but not very much about what was going on and why. And it's important to figure that out in order to get to the good thread that Patrick has pointed us to, and that a good dozen or so people since then have said, yeah, this is a good thread, you should read it. Mo Brooks has been served with a lawsuit filed by Eric Swalwell days after attorneys for Swalwell said they were having trouble tracking down the Alabama Republican. Brooks and a Swalwell representative confirmed. Lots of action about this over the weekend, and you probably know some of it already. The lawsuit accuses Brooks and other allies of former President Trump of provoking the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Again, Forrest Gump, he's everywhere. He's at the Steve Scalise shooting. He's encouraging the attack on the Capitol. He's everywhere. Brooks tweeted on Sunday that he had been served with the suit and claimed that members of, quote, Swalwell's team broke into his home and served the lawsuit to his wife. Which, you can serve the wife. That's fine. But somehow he thought that was beyond the pale, and lots of people just laughed about that. Anyway. Then he goes and tweets that this is a big problem. He says to Eric Swalwell via Twitter, well, Swalwell finally, all caps, did his job, served complaint on my wife, all caps here, which also engendered a lot of like Borat gifs in response. My wife, she served with subpoena. Anyway, horrible, all caps, Swalwell's team committed a all caps crime by unlawfully sneaking, more all caps, into my house and accosting my wife. Alabama Code 13A72, he says, reads, first degree criminal trespass, year in jail, $6,000 fine, more to come, Brooks tweeted. Well, he did tweet that. And we'll get to the rest of it here. I don't know whether The Hill covers it or not, but let's see. Speaking on to CNN, Philip Andonian, an attorney for Swalwell, shot back at Brooks's claims of unlawful entry. No one entered or even attempted to enter the Brooks' house. That allegation is completely untrue. A process server lawfully served the papers on Mo Brooks' wife as the federal rules allow, Andonian said. This was after her initial efforts to avoid service. Mo Brooks has no one but himself to blame for the fact that it came to this, Andonian continued. We asked him to waive service. We offered to meet him at a place of his choosing. Instead of working things out like a civilized person, he engaged in a juvenile game of Twitter trolling over the past few days and continued to evade service. I guess at some point we stop and explain in case somebody doesn't know, right, that if you're suing somebody, you got to serve them with papers that says so. unless you can make contact with their lawyers and you can say, look, if you'll waive service, we'll all just agree. We're suing you and you know it, and we'll deal with the lawsuit. But if you want, you can insist on service. And yes, the fact is, just as it is when we describe things in Congress, right? The papers have to transfer from one house to the next, and we actually talk about actually having to carry those papers from one to the next. You can't just look it up on the internet. What did the House just pass, right? We still have this requirement here too. If you are never served with process, you can show up in court at some point and say, this whole thing should be dismissed because it's unfair to me in our system. I get to have an attorney represent me and defend against this lawsuit, and I didn't know anything about it. Because you're supposed to serve process on me to let me know that my rights are in jeopardy, and you didn't do it. You can't just now take my rights away with a default judgment because I didn't show up, because I didn't know about the suit. That's the whole idea behind this, is to say you can't start the suit and therefore can never win the suit unless you serve me with the papers. And you can't serve me with the papers if I keep hiding from the service of the papers, you see? All right. So just by way of finishing up this article here, he's trying to avoid service. He's instructing his wife how to avoid service. We asked him to waive service or meet him wherever he wants, but no. Instead, he does this. The important thing is that the complaint has been served, and Mo Brooks can now be held accountable for his role in inciting the deadly insurrection at the Capitol. Swalwell's lawsuit, filed in March, that's hard to say, Swalwell's lawsuit, accuses the former president, his one-time personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, I guess they're no longer in that relationship, his son, Donald Trump Jr., and Brooks of instigating the January 6th riot and breaking multiple Washington, D.C. laws in the process. The suit specifically cites the Stop the Steal rally that took place immediately before rioters broke into the Capitol. Trump has claimed that he holds absolute immunity from Swalwell's lawsuit and called for it to be dismissed in his own court filings. So then what happens? So now the good thread explaining the issues around the process service for Mo Brooks, now being labeled on Twitter, hashtag, ready for the hashtag, Cryin' Mo. Sure, why not? It is the thread of Andrew C. Laufer Esquire, from which title we are to assume that he is a lawyer, and I guess he is. And here's what he has to say about this thing. A thread regarding Cryin' Mo, service of process, and insurance coverage. We see here Mo crying like a colicky baby. Why is that? The reason is his wife was just served with process, a lawsuit, righteously instituted by Representative Eric Swalwell for Cryin' Mo's antics inciting an insurrection. Now, the tweet is illustrated by the link to Mo Brooks's tweet that we read earlier, crying about having been served process. Now, we should point out at this stage of the game, I guess, that Mo Brooks has accused Swalwell's team of committing a crime by breaking into his house. And by way of proof of what he has to say about it, Alabama Code 13A72, first-degree criminal trespass, year in jail, $6,000 fine, etc. By way of proof, he offers not a screenshot per se, but a picture of his computer screen reading the Alabama law from, presumably the correct website. And what's most interesting about the fact that he chose not to go with a screenshot, but with a picture taken on his phone of the screen of his computer is that people very quickly noticed that he had taken a picture of the entire screen of his thing. And that can often be embarrassing depending on what tabs you might have open, but that's not what is at issue. We're talking about the entire screen, meaning the physical, the appliance unit, the electric unit that constitutes the screen, including the frame around it and the stand and all of surrounding hardware that makes the screen work. Which ordinarily, one, a screenshot eliminates all of that. You can't get that in a picture. And two, you could crop your picture a little bit, and apparently he probably should have, because the picture that he included, allegedly, although I don't see it in this photo, but others were circulating different photos. Maybe he took multiple shots. But in taking that picture, he captured the bit of note paper. Looks like scotch taped to the lower frame of his of the screen of the monitor, I guess I should say, rather than the screen, is written out his passwords. There was a PIN number on there, and there was his Gmail password, which was like, oh my God, what are you doing? Don't you? I guess people really just don't know. They're just not savvy people about life in general, and they do dumb things like this, like some sort of Nolan Sorrento move from Ready Player One, putting your password, sticking it at a prominent place like that. It was really kind of nutty. And by the way, I did also see other people pointing out, like, this guy is like on the Intelligence Committee, I think, and not just on the Intelligence Committee, but does Dana Houle point this out? Let me see if I can find this thing, because he tweeted it this morning, but pointing out, not just any random guy, Mo Brooks is here, but how did he put it? Right, there we are. Not just a random member of Congress who needs his Gmail account and password taped to his computer screen, which, by the way, come on. Do you really even need it? Or some rando who tweeted out his Gmail account and password. It's worse. Mo Brooks is a member of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Cyber Innovative Technology and Information Systems. So, like, actually supposed to be in charge of, like, for instance, if you were going to have a hearing about why are so many people launching cyber attacks against our companies these days, and how can we prevent it? How can we defend against these sophisticated hackers? I know, take a picture of your password and tweet it out. Yeah, so we're not really going to get anywhere on that score anytime soon. But that wasn't what was so great about the thread that Patrick had recommended to me. Let's go back to Andrew Laufer's thing and let him explain why is Mo sitting here crying about having been served process in this suit. On January 6th, we're back to January 6th, right? This is all because of Swalwell's suit for Crying Mo's antics inciting an insurrection on January 6th. Now, you may ask, but they didn't serve him. Don't they have to do that in order to have good or proper service? Well, in the olden days, maybe. But now I guess the answer is no. A process server, the plaintiff hires a company to serve process, right, can serve a person of suitable age and discretion instead of the actual defendant. In other words, if you encounter somebody at his household who's an adult and, is presumably trustworthy, it's his wife, she's an adult, she can handle herself, you serve her with process. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to find Mo Brooks and give it to him. You can say, here, you're served. So in this case, it's Crying Mo's wife gets served. She is someone who resides with him, over 18 years of age, and not on active military duty. So there you go. She can be called, that is, if you were on active military duty, you could be called away at a moment's notice and therefore be unable to pass on service or the fact that you've been served with notice, before he gets home from grocery shopping or whatever it is he's doing. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's riding around, laps around the local junior high school, for all I know. It's from Alabama. Anyway, the other guy was from Alabama who did that. I'm just saying. Maybe they're friends. Anyway, if she were on active military duty, maybe she gets deployed before he gets home. No, that's not the case. So, she fits the criteria for someone being of suitable age and discretion. Now, Crying Mo can allege in his answer to the lawsuit an affirmative defense that his wife isn't of suitable discretion. He could argue that. Let's say they're estranged or separated or going through a divorce. That's, legitimate ways in which that could happen. He could allege that she didn't have the ability to accept service on his behalf. Issues of service can get funky. Recently, Andrew Laufer says, my office attempted service on an individual outside of the country. After much due diligence, we were unsuccessful. We made an application to the court requesting alternative service via email on a representative of the defendant in the U.S. And this was in the Eastern District of New York, where the judge granted it. So, you can get around the restrictions or the old-fashioned paper requirements in many ways. Crying Mo will most likely not be successful with this defense, as the court will likely find service was good or perfected on his wife. Now, why else is Mo crying? He's crying pretty hard because he may not have insurance coverage for this lawsuit. When someone who has assets like Crying Mo, they should have insurance coverage in the event of a loss or a lawsuit. Insurance policies can cover a myriad of events. It's questionable whether they'll cover this particular suit due to the fact that it concerns inciting a riot, an insurrection against kick-ass Congressman Eric Swalwell and his colleagues and the USA. That's the way Andrew puts it. If there is no insurance coverage, Crying Mo will be crying a whole lot louder because he'll have to come out of pocket for defense costs and any settlement or verdict. That will probably run into the millions for Crying Mo. Sad that Crying Mo has a lot to be said and crying about. So, very interesting and helpful in figuring out exactly what he's up to. But that's a good point, right? Most people probably don't have, who has insurrection insurance, right? But okay, yeah, it'll cost him money, but he'll try and raise it on GoFundMe or whatever, and probably work too. Plus, he could probably redirect, might be able to get a decision allowing him to redirect some of his PAC money, if he's got a leadership PAC, to handle some of those things. Or he can start one real quick anyway. But interesting. Let's see. And other weird paperwork issues out there, we learned over the weekend. Here's just a quick hit. Not a major import, but we're running out of time here for the day. But yes, apparently heading into the weekend, Marjorie Trader Greene up to another of her stupid tricks because she's got so much time on her hands because she's not on any committees because she's a Nazi insurrectionist and whatnot. Apparently has written a letter to Joe Biden demanding an inquiry into the Wuhan lab leak questions because why not? What the F else is she going to do with her time? And one thing she might be doing with her time is buying a effing calendar or going to effing elementary school or something like that, where you would realize that when you pose a demand on the president, she wrote a whole, stupid letter making all kinds of demands and put it on Twitter and posted it everywhere. Somebody, I guess she hired somebody who knows how to write such things. And believe me, the substance of the letter, not worth your time. What is worth your time, or I'm forcing you to make time for, is the final, literally the final line before the signature block on this letter. And it is this. We urge your administration to act to provide us with these answers of these specific questions that she lists here by June 31st, 2021. A very, very short deadline, unless, of course, because it is now June 7th. The letter is dated. Yes, you're already seeing what's coming here. The letter is dated February 30th, 2000, whatever. You get the idea here. It's June 4th that she wrote the letter. She wants answers by June 31st. God damn it. Get on it. There is, of course, no June 31st on this calendar or any other calendar. There's no leap year that has a June 31st. I don't know. Is it just a typo? Did she mean July 31st? Did she mean June 30th? Who cares? Doesn't make a difference. She's an idiot. You should ignore the letter regardless. And even if it was written correctly and she wasn't an idiot, there would be plenty of reason for Biden to ignore it. You just write back and say, yeah, we're looking into it. 2 weeks. We're strongly looking into it. You don't really have to answer. But it's that much funnier when she does dumb stuff like this. June 31st. My goodness. Okay. Well, at any rate, that I thought was a funny way to end for the day. There's plenty more to talk about, of course. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Joan McCarter should be here. The Supreme Court should probably be getting around to ending life as we know it bit by bit. And we'll have plenty to talk about there, too, of course, I'm sure. We'll see whether that is occupying her mind tomorrow, or whether the return from the Memorial Day recess is mostly on her mind and seeing what Congress is going to get back to or not get back to, or talk more about Joe Manchin making no sense or what have you. I don't know. We will see. If not, then perhaps maybe the Supreme Court's decisions or non-decisions might interest Armando. perhaps we could tempt him to coming back onto the program. And lots more to catch up with, the things that I parked here over the weekend, so only some of which had to do with Trump's pants. And a few people even trying to speculate as to what we might actually do, agenda-wise, to stop the thing we discussed moments ago as being an unstoppable juggernaut. Republicans simply deciding from the state legislatures on up to the U.S. Supreme Court that they simply don't care what the law is. They're going to do what they want to do. What do you do in preparation for something like this? There are some steps we can take. They could throw them all out again, of course. They all depend on the rule of law. But it's worth a shot. And if you can use those laws to dislodge some of those people from positions of power from which they can make unqualified and incorrect decisions in their own favor, well then, yeah, you'll be able to avoid a lot of these problems. You'll avoid a lot of more problems in your life, though, if you just stay tuned here to Netroots Radio and wait for Justice Putnam to bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Right up on the top of the list, of course, from the weekend, Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying, very interestingly, that she has a duty, a responsibility, not to let the briefing room of the White House be used as a forum for propaganda. All of that, all the background leading up to that, and much more from around the country and around the world. Next, stay tuned.